out of sight, out of mind. You found someone new, but I can't change my love the way that you do.
This is the story of a lost neighborhood and of its people who did not want to go.
I don't want no money. I want my home. The old man is old. See how the old man is old? And I'm old. That's enough. I don't want to get out. I said to my two daughters, they don't want to get out too because they spend a lot of money. Plenty of money they spend in this place. We not get none to nobody. Never.
Hi, welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. And tonight we're having Al Lupo, who writes for this weekly edition of the Globe, City Weekly edition of the Globe on Sundays. And he does special stories too. And matter of fact, I read a couple of them off and on. Yeah,
well, you have no taste, that's all. Nobody forced you to do this. I mean, I have to write them or I don't get paid. Why do you read them?
And I call him up every so often and let him know. And he's probably saying, why does this guy call me?
I love your calls. I also love your voicemail. No, you're a pleasure. You're a pleasure when you call.
I love your message. Right,
I'm going to get a Pulitzer Prize for the message.
This is Al the machine. Al the guy is out.
Sometimes people get
robbing old ladies.
Sometimes people get me on the phone and they say, is this the machine? I say, yes, this is the machine, programmed to answer your every question.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. And now we'll get back to the purpose. We're here, and you've been here. I think this is your 5th trip. You are the most.
I thought it was my 4th. It just shows you how forgetful one of them was.
Yeah, I think you did our 2nd show. I remember the 2nd show. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, the 2nd show was we were fighting over land down in the West End, and the people from Charles River Park didn't want us to have anything to do with the project because they said if we got back into the project, they would make it an instant slum. And I didn't even know you were at the meeting, and you wrote a big column saying, if those people down Charles River Park, I immediately called you and said, hey.
Who knows? They might have had a point. You know?
Yeah, well, you know, they did.
Your neighborhood's gone down since
if I got back in there, the place would automatically, the dust would have come down.
Oh, sure, yeah. Tenements going up.
Yeah, I'm like that. Al has written a book, and it's called The Messiah Comes Tomorrow. And it's a little different than most other books in that, I'll let you explain it because I know I'll mess it up.
No, you won't mess it up, but you're right, it is different. Yeah. This is a collection. It's a collection of columns and stories that I've done over 40 years as a reporter and a columnist, mostly around here, but also in New York and Baltimore. And it's about working stiff Jews. It's about a disappearing landscape on the American scene.
A lot of people don't think they think that's oxymoron.
There's a lot of people Jewish people and non-Jewish people who think the Jewish folks are all upper middle class and they all live in the suburbs and they're all in the professions. Well, increasingly that's true over the years, but it wasn't always so, as you know, having lived in the West End. As I know, having grown up in Winthrop at the time I did grow up in Winthrop. And I thought it was important to put this stuff in a book. First of all, for my own fat ego as a journalist, I hadn't done a book. This is the 4th book, but I hadn't done one in a lot of years. And more important than that, to get it in a book where it'll at least last for a while, because I don't want these stories relegated to some yellowing news clips or a database that nobody's going to read. I want these things preserved. And it's about everything from family to characters I've met over the years, a burlesque comedian and Baltimore's answer to the combat zone, some bookies who were indicted a few years ago here in Federal District, U.S. District Court in Boston, secondhand clothing salesmen, all kinds of people, all kinds of characters. I hope the book is mostly humorous. Some of it's poignant, and some of it is sad.
I hope you got Doc Sagansky in there.
I think I've mentioned Doc in there. The bookies that I referred to, 3 guys who were brought up on charges of money laundering because they figured if they got them on money laundering, they could really nail them. And then they'd give them 18 months minimum, and then they'd force them to talk about Bulger and Flemmy. Now, this is at a time when the U.S. attorney may not have known that the FBI knew all about Bulger and Fleming because they were on the payroll. So these poor guys are caught in the middle, going away for extraordinary amounts of time because they were bookies.
Yeah, amazing.
Two of them did go away.
Yeah,
and it was kind of a crunch. I thought it was a bit unfair, frankly.
I think the FBI in Boston, for the last 30 or 40 years, was a lot unfair. And I don't want to paint everybody with a brush, the same brush, because there are guys like Larry Gilligan, who's a West End kid, that was an FBI agent, come out of the West End.
A lot of good FBI agents. Most of them are good agents.
You know, never did anything like that in his life, and never would. And there's a whole host of them that have standards. It's just this little crew that somehow got co-opted. And they turned the whole world around. Peter Lamoni, who's a West End kid, just got out. I mean, they put him away for 33 years, basically on the strength that at one point he told Joe Barboza was picking on some West End guy, and he said, hey, leave him alone, he's with me. And Joe, because Joe has that kind of ego, or had that kind of ego, that you know, he couldn't stab Peter because he would have gotten in a lot of trouble. When he went away, remembered it and put him into the mix.
Yeah, I did a piece on Peter Lamoni back on the Boston Phoenix back in, about 15 years ago. And I think the only reason they didn't let him out, by the way, the book isn't about this.
No, I know that.
But I think the only reason that they didn't pardon him then was because they didn't want to look soft on crime. And they also said, well, he'll go back to the North End and he might take charge of the mob.
Yeah, reinvent
Now,
it.
of course, Mr. Lamoni would deny that he would do a thing like that. My theory was that if that were true, it probably would have been one of the best things that ever happened to the mob, because he's a very smart guy, and he has a lot of common sense, and I'm glad he's out, and I'm glad Mr. Salvati's out. And I'm proud of Doc Sagansky, who went away for 18 months and never opened his mouth.
That's right. Doc was.
And his bodyguard, Mo Weinstein, who was 76 years old when they nailed him.
Newsletter. Mo used to get my newsletter.
Used to?
Why, is he still alive?
I don't know. I hope so.
I don't know. I
hope
what
so. It's hard to keep. Some of these guys last a long time.
Sometimes
I hope I can pattern my life after that part of it.
Sometimes these people just drop off my list, my mailing list, and I never know if it's because they got tired of receiving it, or they just or they moved and they forgot.
Oh, I hope I never drop off your mailing list. I love getting the publication, and I save every one of them. I got a file this thick, and I'm going to go to court, and you're in trouble.
Just don't give it to the FBI.
No, not the FBI. Anyway, on this book, it's a lot of it is about family. My father and my mother are pictured on the cover,
right?
With his 1946 Ford, which is the first car he owned. He didn't learn to drive till he was about 37 years old. He had no need to, because for 17 years he sold men's clothing in Fellines. He was one of those guys you'd see with a tape measure around his neck. And he had the file cards of every customer. Right. And when some clothes came in from Hart, Schaffner and Marx or whoever, he'd pick up the phone, he'd call them. He was a real salesman. Yeah. But one day in 1945, he walked out, and he never came back after lunch. He went for lunch and never came back. And I said to him, after 17 years later, I said, another 8 years, you would have been a 25-year man. He said, yeah, they would have given me a watch, but I already knew what time it was. So his twin brother, Uncle Leo, my Uncle Leo convinced him to become a traveling salesman. Okay. Well, to be a traveling salesman, you do need a car. Definitely. So he learned in 1945 or 46 to drive a car at the age of 37 or 38. And that was before the interstate highways, you'll remember. Yeah. So these guys used to schlep all over New England, from the northernmost, Aroostook County, Maine, all the way to the New York border in Connecticut. And there weren't that many big chain stores. They were selling specialty shops. They might have 2, 3 accounts in a town or a city. Right. They're lugging those big sample bags. They're wearing a fedora hat, the tie up to the top, the suit jacket, very neat, very polite, lots of jokes, some of them really lousy jokes. And they had a wonderful fraternity. They always called themselves the boys. They could be 50-some years old, but they were always the boys. Right. And he would always refer to himself, with all the aggravation he had, Jimmy, with all the tough driving, meeting a moose in the middle of Maine in a snowstorm. The moose won, he lost. My father could handle himself, but not with a moose. With all the aggravation they had, he used to say, I'm a traveling man. And he was proud of that. And after he died, I found the records he kept of each account and each sale. And it was something he took pride in. And my mother and Dad were the firstborn of immigrants. And they lived everywhere. They lived in Roxbury. They lived in the old New York street section of the South End.
Yeah,
when
it's
they
the same
were
as the West End,
babies.
actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
Also destroyed. You know, God forbid
right.
there should be an integrated neighborhood in
That's
Boston.
right.
Wipe it right out.
That's
Yeah,
right. The
the two most diversified neighborhoods. See ya. Yeah. Then they wonder why we have problems in the city. They lived in Revere. They lived in Chelsea. They lived in tenements. They lived in three-deckers. And my father's father was a Romanian.
Yeah.
And Romanian Jews were a little different than Russian Jews, Polish Jews, German Jews, and other kind of Jews. They were quite Romanian. And this could be an interesting, this could be an interesting thing. They loved drinking white wine and eating this horrendous thing called mamaliga, which was you could plaster your house with it. It was this potato dish. Yeah. Excuse me, we're in Massachusetts, potato dish.
Potato,
and you needed the white
West
wine.
End potato.
You needed the white wine after you ate the mamaliga. Yeah. And interestingly enough, you know, we hear about immigrants and how everyone got along and the families were so happy. Not always so.
No.
Both grandfathers left the family. Both of them left the family. And the Romanian went to New York. And he would spend his day sitting, he had relatives there, he would spend his day sitting at a cafe called Moskowitz and Lupowitz, which was a big cafe in the Lower East Side then, drinking white wine and watching the Maidlim, the girls, walk by. How he made a living, I don't know. During Prohibition, he made bathtub gin. That I do know.
Well, that's probably how he made his living.
And that's where the Lupescus were. See, Lupo comes from Lupescu, which is Romanian. And there were a bunch of Lupescu. My father told the story of each son went to join the father to see if they could make a living. And my father told this wonderful story about going and joining his twin brother, Leo. And Leo said, excuse me, Leo said, we got to meet our cousin, Yak Lupescu. Yak is short, I guess, for Jacob. Okay? I'm guessing. I don't know. Well, Yak was into stuff. Yak had a crew.
I've met a few of those.
Yak had a crew of Lower East Side Jewish guys, and they hung in this pool room. And my father had hung in pool rooms in Revere, you know, on Shirley Ave. And he was a good pool player, and he could handle himself. He wasn't a bully. He'd never started a fight.
He was a boxer, too, if I remember right.
Well, he was not a professional boxer, but he could handle himself.
High Diamond said I remember that.
My father was good with his dukes, but he was never a bully. So he and Leo go into this pool room. He said, everyone stops playing pool and stares at them. My father said, I've never been so scared in my life. He says, we're standing like two schmendricks, you know. Where are you guys and where are you from? He says, thank God Yuck came in and said, boys, these are my cousins from Boston. They're okay.
Okay, yeah.
So I love these stories. And then, of course, as a reporter, you meet a whole bunch of characters. And you want to write about them, too. Yeah, I'm not putting you in a book. I want it to be clean. So, talking with that burlesque comedian in the dressing room, this down-and-out dressing room of a deteriorated burlesque house in Baltimore's block, they called it the block. It was a sad and poignant story, and it was a wonderful place to be. Going down the block a few days later or earlier, I can't remember, and talking to a guy who sold third-hand clothes. If he found a left-foot shoe, he'd put it in the window. He'd say, special today only. If you got the other one, it'll match.
Amputees.
He would put Yiddish signs in his window. He'd say, direct from Jenneveld. Well, Jenneveld means the other world, which means down there, right? So two guys from the West Virginia mountains, a couple of winos, were standing outside the store once, and he heard them talking, because he had the door open, because it was always hot in Baltimore.
Right.
And one said, Jenneveld? Yo, where's that from? He says, I think I've been there, just outside of Chicago.
He probably had been, you know.
Yeah, in more ways than one. I want to, if I'm allowed to, there's something that I want to read here. It's from the introduction. Now I'm going to look like a professor from nearby Tufts.
That's right.
And this pretty much explains what I was trying to do with this. Oh, about 6 paragraphs.
Beautiful.
Except for the Hasidic communities, gone with the death of my grandparents' parents and their generations, and disappearing with the upward mobility of mine and subsequent generations, is the poetry of a people. The know-it-all Connor talk of local wise guys, the Yiddish accented English of the Russian and European immigrants, the leftover Yiddish curses and blessings and the inherited shrugs and sing-song patter of their American-born offspring and grandkids. Gone, too, is the time of folk tales, when a grandmother or uncle would hold forth in the parlor or kitchen about some relative or incident in another country. The tales, real and apocryphal, became litany repeated and recited by subsequent generations until television arrived and replaced the spoken word and the piano sing-alongs. In that time, there were as many Jewish salesmen, carpenters, glaziers, butchers, milkmen, and bartenders as there were lawyers, doctors, and accountants. For too long now, the perception of Jews in America is that of an upper middle class people engaged mainly in the professions and rarely doing the dirty work. For much too long, thanks to the cliches of modern literature and film, the Jew is seen as a kvetch, a whining, self-pitying, mother-resenting character. Lost somehow are the others, the working stiffs, the small-time business owners, the amateur scholars, the bookies and street sluggers. They deserve their shot. Generations of readers born after World War II should understand what once predominated and what sometimes can still be found. Such characters, very few of them famous, are part of the rich American landscape. And then I just happen to note, my father Max grew up with Jewish guys named Soapy and Spongy. I grew up with Jewish guys named Klotzer, Izzy, Rosie, Tiny, Monk, the Penguin, Butch, Sammy, Rocky, and the Heap. Which should remind you of where you grew up.
Exactly. You know, it's funny. And I think I told you a story about, you know, where all the cultures clashed and mingled and ran over each other. Stanley Friedman with the Christmas tree.
Oh, that's a wonderful story.
I mean, and that just goes to, you know,
told my wife that story.
All that, you know, the flow and the ebb of it, you know what I mean? It was those things happen in those neighborhoods. Now everything has been like, everybody's intermarried, intercultured, and if you want, I don't know what it is. It's just been like we've been white-breaded. You know?
Yeah.
The United States is being one big loaf of white bread is what we're.
Well, I'll give you an example of both, all right?
Yeah.
And it's personal from my family, and some of this is in the book and some of it isn't. Our son Steve is a police officer. He's a detective.
Right.
City of Irving, Texas, PD, sadly, where that gang killed one of his colleagues.
Oh, the breakout.
Steve is married to a woman who isn't Jewish, who grew up vaguely Protestant, blonde, blue-eyed, on a ranch in Nebraska. She was a rodeo rider, among other things. I mean, this is as close to the West End of Winthrop as Latvia is, okay?
Right.
Their daughter is, you know, growing up there, and a lot of that area is Southern Fundamentalist Baptist Bible Belt.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting little situation. My son showed up at a call, a suicide call. A woman was threatening to commit suicide, and he was the first cop on the scene. And here's this Jewish guy with an Italian name, all right, and an Irish-American mother, and he shows up at the scene, speaking in his Massachusetts accent in Texas, and he knocks and he says, "Please let me in, I want to help, whatever." And the woman says, "Not till you testify," which is some, you know, it doesn't mean trial.
No, I know, yeah.
So I said, "What did you do?" He said, "I made it up as I went along." He said, "I'm there trying to save her life, and I'm testifying."
I gave my soul to
whatever got him in the house.
Yeah, that's right.
So a lot of that area, you go down and visit that area, and you don't find too many hyphenated Americans.
No.
There's some Mexican Americans. There's a few Vietnamese Americans.
Yeah.
But there's all the white ethnics have become whiter and whiter and have blended in more and more. Now, the other story. My daughter
California.
is out in California, out in L.A. and San Francisco. She just got married this year to a Filipino American. That family...
He's not Jewish, I take it.
He's not Jewish, you take it. Although he broke the glass at the ceremony and I yelled Mazel Tov.
No, beautiful.
And they're the sweetest, most wonderful family you could ever meet. They would remind you of the families in the West End.
Right.
When you come in to visit, there's food all over the place. They're always working. When they're through working, they're always cooking. They don't want you to do a thing. You can ask 17 times, and 18 times they'll tell you, no, relax, have a drink, have something to eat. And the first time we visited, they said, "You live here." And I said, "You mean we can stay here? Thank you." And he said, "No, you can live here." I said, "Will you support me?" And he said, "Yeah." So there are some things that remind us of the way it used to be.
I'll tell you, I had my 60th birthday here. I turned 60 in January, so I got a cake and put a 60. I had
Well,
Frank Levine,
congratulations. Mazel tov.
Frank Levine, Arthur Vendetti, and Mosi on here, and we talked about, I said, this is what we do when we have birthday parties. We sit around and talk about the old days. And Frank Levine brought it up. He was talking about, Arthur Vendetti was not related to the people Frank was talking about, but Frank goes, you're talking to, the people, the Vendettis from Eaton Street? He said, no, I wasn't related to them. Well, Frank says, I used to go over to their house all the time. I'd go over Christmas Eve with that macaroni thing, and then they invite me to go to midnight mass, and I went.
Well, the good news is that we're going to produce some of the most gorgeous children in the history of civilization. I mean, you get these groups together, and the kids that are going to come out are really good looking. And I think they're going to take the best of everything.
You think they're not going to be interbred like Weld and sit there? He got elected by What Me Worry?
No. They're not going to look like Weld. But Weld's kids, I predict, will be marrying a whole variety, a Heinz 57. If these patterns continue, I'm not picking on Weld or I don't know anything about
some of those
his family.
old-line Yankees, I mean, you talk to them and you sometimes wonder, they've been interbred. And
they've been sticking together, but that's breaking down. That's breaking down a lot. And the beauty of America, with all of our problems, with all the things that go wrong, with all of our drawbacks, one of the wonderful things about America is that we have figured out, unlike most countries,
how to mingle.
How to mingle. You got it. That's the best way of putting it. You did it better than I did. That's the best verb you could have used.
Well, think of it this way. My daughter's having a baby. My daughter is Irish, Lithuanian, and Italian. Okay? She married, her husband is Irish, Scottish, and English. So I'm going to have a kid that is going to, I don't know what the hell he's
going to be a good-looking kid?
I hope. Either that or get the worst of all. He may end up looking like me. I don't know.
No. Yeah, well, let's hope. I say the same thing to my family.
All those neighborhoods are gone. That era is over. We're probably dinosaurs. You'll never see it again. Unless something that I can't foresee happens.
It may be happening in the Vietnamese neighborhoods. It may be happening in the Dominican neighborhood.
Yeah.
You may have Latin American guys with nicknames just as the guys whose nicknames are. Each culture, it certainly has gone on in the African American neighborhoods. But as far as the white ethnics, that era is this.
It's gone.
This is about Jews mostly, but you could have written this book about Italians, about Irish, about Greeks. It's like the subtitle is Tales from the American Shtetl. Shtetl is Yiddish, it means village where you came from. But it's the American, and that's a very important point because people who aren't Jewish and who have read the book have come up to me and have said, I recognized my relatives and friends and neighbors in that book.
I can understand.
And one of the reasons I'm saying that is so you'll buy it. That's why I'm saying that.
Not just one copy. Get one to your friends.
Oh, yeah, buy a lot of copies. It's a very cheap book. Am I allowed to say how much it is? $19.95. I mean, that's...
cheaper twice the price.
I mean, $19.95. You won't go on a cruise for that.
That's right. It's hardcover, too.
That's right. Look. Somebody said to me today, Ralph Sirianni, a former police officer and state representative in Winthrop, said, why don't they make it $20? Why does it have to be $19.95? He said, for the same reason that I heard a tour advertised this morning on radio for $2,999. So you say to yourself, oh, thank God, this could have cost me $3,000.
I ever tell you about that story, the advertiser, he was I forgot his name now, but he was supposed to be the father of advertising.
Oh, from Cambridge.
I
just forgot his name. He lived to about 100 and some years old.
The only reason, I strictly remembered it because some guy got stuck in those days. There's white salmon and red salmon.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know about white salmon, and a lot of people won't eat it. So the guy was stuck with a whole lot of white salmon, right? Canned white salmon, right? He went to this guy, right? And the guy put on the can, right? On the labels, guaranteed not to turn red in the can.
Now, see, I wish I had a mind like that, because if I had a mind like that,
the books would be flowing.
This book would be on the bestseller list, no question
right
about
it. Right out the door.
Yeah, right.
What do you want?
I also do a couple of chapters in this book about Israel, or at least attitudes towards Israel, and that makes the book very...
It's changing. Israel's
pretty
changing.
Current.
Yeah, Israel's changing quite a bit. I talked to Frank Levine, Frank was on the Exodus boats, and every summer he goes over there to, what do you call them,
Reunions?
No, kibbutz.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And he like talks about, you know, the founding of Israel.
Oh, well, everything changes, every
Yeah.
nation changes, and they're in some very difficult
Yeah.
times now.
Yeah.
And I don't get
I
into
believe-
the
yeah.
foreign policy stuff. I've done that over the
Yeah.
years. I've written about foreign policy stuff. I've been to Israel. I've been overseas. I've done overseas stories. I have to tell you, the stories I enjoy the most are the local stories. Because the most poetic
Yeah.
people are the ones that you meet almost on a daily basis. And that's another reason I wanted to write this. I don't want those people and their quotes to go into the vast
You remember Jack-
ozone without being remembered.
Remember Jack Pa?
Oh, sure.
He said the most interesting people to talk to, he says, are prostitutes.
You've certainly taken a bridge from where I started, I'll tell you.
This book-
Prostitutes, cab drivers,
Right? Exactly.
people who sell newspapers.
Yeah.
You meet a great cross-section of the
Yeah,
world.
that's right. That's right.
And a lot of politicians still,
Yeah.
because they really do have to,
Yeah.
if they're into constituent services, they really do have
Most
to
of them
deal
aren't
with.
anymore, though. That's the big problem. I
Well, it
find.
depends on where they are, you know,
Yeah.
what level we're talking about. If they're local and they're state reps, they still have to,
Well, a lot of them you call up and, well, he's in the field or he's at a meeting.
Where
he'll
is
call
this
you back.
field?
I
I
don't
want to know
know.
where this field is, because I
plowing.
want to go to that field.
He's plowing. You know, he's a farmer.
It's like when you talk to people, will you accept a halfway house in your neighborhood? And they'll say, oh, no, I'm all for halfway house, but it should be somewhere else. I
Yeah.
once wrote a column called, Where is Somewhere Else?
Yeah.
Because in this town, somewhere else, you got a sewage treatment plant, an airport, a nuclear waste facility, halfway houses, prisons, brothels. Who knows what you got in this town called somewhere else? Because we're putting everything we don't want
Well,
in
you know,
the
it's the
somewhere
old,
else
the old
now.
NIMBY. In the old days, they just put things wherever they, you know, you can find them. And
Yeah,
sometimes
but
it worked and
usually-
sometimes it didn't.
No, usually it was put in, it wasn't put in Dover, Jim. I mean,
Never.
it wasn't in Wellesley.
They're still not.
That's right, that's right. I mean,
Those things
the
don't
oil
change.
tanks, the oil farms,
Yeah.
most of the prisons, there are some exceptions to that.
Yeah.
The airport,
Yeah.
the sewage treatment plants.
Right.
You won't find too many of those in the W towns,
That's right.
or too far down on the South Shore, or
That's
too
right.
far up on the North Shore.
I think a lot of the problem is a lot of those people from those towns, I'm talking about,
Those and them towns.
I'm reverting back to the West End, using the same rules that they had out in the W towns and all those places, and they're using those rules and they're putting them in place into the downtown area now, like the South End's been totally
totally.
gentrified.
Yeah.
Charlestown's almost totally, yeah.
One of the problems that we're running into is that they don't want noise outside.
Yeah.
They don't want guys hanging around the corner.
That's why they moved into a city, right?
Yeah, they moved into the city, but they want the same standards they
Right.
used in suburbia,
Right.
which means we're going to have some really boring cities if these
right.
people get their way.
Al, is there anything, we're going to have to finish up. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about your book? I know we've got off a little bit, and I'm sorry on that, but,
That's okay, I don't mind that, and thank you for letting me
I mean,
be
is there anything
here.
else you'd like to say
Yeah,
about
what
it?
I'd like to say.
Go out
finally,
and buy it!
you know, I think there's a lot of good laughs in this book.
Yeah.
Whatever age you are, you're going to get something out of this book. And sure, I hope you buy it. And if you don't buy it, I hope you go to the library and read it. The important thing is
Read it.
Don't just watch television.
That's right.
Except this show.
That's
Read.
right, that's right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
James.
Okay, thank you, Al. It was a pleasure having you here again, and see you at the next West End video newsletter.
Thank you.
You found someone new, but I can't change my love the way that you do.